yesterday dominated by Lane Johnson in that impromptu news that came out, John. Do we have anything new to kind of further the story, or are we kind of in limbo until this B sample gets ironed out?
Yeah, it looks like we're in limbo, and I think that's why Lane Johnson's camp is so upset, because this news is not supposed to be out there until the B sample part of it is done. Now, while that might be something to complain about from a moral standpoint, and understandably so, as I mentioned yesterday, B samples rarely come back differently from A samples. So if they're counting on something being different in the testing, I think they're barking up the wrong tree. So it comes down to the defense. And if the defense is going to be Lane Johnson cleared it with the proper people in the NFL, that might be legitimate. If he cleared it with people not involved with the NFL, in other words, other players or trainers or someone of that nature, then it's not going to hold water. So it really is in limbo, just depending on what the defense is going to be.
Yeah, John, it seems that his agent, who made a pretty terse statement yesterday, is kind of angry because, as you chronicled, this information is not supposed to be out. This happens a lot where there's a lot of investigation, but a lot of times you don't know about it. The news doesn't get out there until the guy is either clear or not.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really not supposed to get out until the appeal is done. But that rarely happens in the NFL. And it works both ways because, sometimes the news leaks of a player getting suspended, obviously early. But really what we have to rely on as far as what Lane Johnson says he tested positive for, that's coming from him directly.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily true either. So you have to look at it from both standpoints as far as leaking information that's either positive for their side, so to speak. I don't think the NFL is all that gung-ho about suspending good players, no matter what the fans think. They don't want good players off the field. So
hey, I want to get your take on this real fast. And you retweeted an Alex Marvez tweet from Sporting News, who tweeted that the suspension he got in 2014 was triggered by Adderall, which is no longer listed as a PED by the NFL. Will that be taken into some consideration when they think about a penalty?
It could be. The problem is they changed the policies. They changed both the PED policy and the substance abuse policy. So to argue it's retroactive at this point, I don't think it's going to hold water, because at the time Lane was suspended, it was against the rules. And I reached out to the NFL about that. They haven't gotten back to me yet, but that is my intimation of the rule. It's not going to be retroactive. But the NFL in the past basically makes up the rules as they go along at times. So if it comes down to something like that and they feel bad for Lane Johnson for whatever reason, I guess that could be put on the table, but I wouldn't count on it if I were an Eagles fan. So that's for sure. And as far as Lane goes, while Adderall obviously is no longer in the policy, there's been a number of people that have been suspended for that over the years, and they really had no recourse to this point, so I don't imagine he will either. But that's just speculation at this point.
Yeah, he obviously that time said that he was given medication that he was told was okay, and that basically it turned out that it wasn't. And now again, he's trying to say that this is something that he thought was okay. And I guess we'll have to see when this all comes out. There's no timeline for it. John, will he play tomorrow night? Is that the intention, that he'll play tomorrow night?
Yeah, I would imagine. It'll be just a cameo appearance, like all the starters. Certainly the game's not important for him. I think the bigger thing is, obviously, he's going to have to address at some point, as I wrote on 973ESPN.com, that this non-denial denial, he's going to have to explain himself. And exactly what's going on at this particular stage of the game. He could lean on the no comment, waiting for the B sample. But this is going to have to be dealt with at some point. So hopefully he tackles it head on, and we'll have to see. Unfortunately for the Eagles, and unfortunately for him, we always talk about Howie Roseman and being very, very savvy with contracts. It looks like he built into this contract that if Lane failed again, the Eagles were off the hook. So they don't even have to negotiate or go after that money. So it's going to hurt Lane's side if this stands up. We're talking about $35.5 million guaranteed that is now voided. Now the Eagles can keep the contract in place, and he can earn all that money back if he performs. But you sleep a lot sounder knowing it's guaranteed money.
No doubt. I want to get your take on something Phil Sheridan said when referring to Matt Tobin playing left tackle. He kind of suggests that maybe the Eagles saw this coming, and as opposed to using Johnson, that's why they decided to go with Tobin, because they knew they weren't going to have Johnson. Do you think, because yesterday you had kind of indicated that the Eagles might have been blindsided by this. Do you read that at all with why they went with Tobin as the left tackle as opposed to getting Johnson some reps there?
No, and I'll tell you why. I think they were blindsided. And as far as the Tobin stuff staying at left tackle, if you go back to last season, the same thing happened. When you're at 90 players in the process, and the Eagles still are in the off-season roster, you have plenty of guys. So basically they've been using a first-team offensive line, a second-team offensive line, and Matt's been taking the snaps at left tackle on the second team, and moving up when Jason Peters and Dennis Kelly's been taking them on right tackle. And I talked about that with Matt after practice the other day, because as a backup offensive lineman, you have to be versatile. You have to play different positions. And he mentioned it was the exact same last year. And then as you get closer to the regular season, you start shifting guys who are going to be on the 53-man around and getting them some reps. So the fact that it's very, very early in the process and they're keeping guys in place, I think it's just business as usual.
John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. He's got 5 guys to watch in tomorrow night's preseason game. We will dive into them in just a second. I want to get your take on the Jason La Canfora tweeting yesterday that the Eagles looking for inside linebacker. We know Tulloch was brought up earlier in the week or late last week. Nothing happening there, it seems, and is at a position that they are obviously looking to upgrade. And he said, doesn't really mention starting caliber guy or depth guy, but you would anticipate they're just looking to add a good player, whether it's a starting caliber guy or a backup guy, because they don't have a lot of depth at that position.
No, they don't. And it's interesting, though, because they've been very, very complimentary of Joe Walker, the rookie 7th-round pick, as backup middle linebacker. But that could be lip service, and they could want a more veteran presence behind Jordan Hicks. And as I said, Stephen Tulloch is not that guy. He's not the guy you can bring in as a backup. So it sort of depends what they want. If their problems are just with the backup position behind Jordan Hicks, then you can see him then bringing in a sort of a young veteran, a 3 or 4 year guy watching the waiver wire that can still play special teams. But if they have an issue with Michael Kendricks, and I think that's a possibility, they could be looking to get a legitimate middle linebacker, and then, as I said, move Jordan Hicks to the weak side and have Nigel Bradham on the strong side, or Michael Kendricks for that matter. So it depends where Schwartz is uncomfortable, and right now he's kept things very, very close to the vest. About the only thing he has admitted is he's lobbied for more bodies at that particular position. I think they like Jordan Hicks as a football player. I don't think there's any question about that. The question is, do they like him at middle linebacker or weak side linebacker? And I can't figure that out yet, because Jim has been very sort of on the fence with that, because if you remember last week, Mike, when he talked about the calls and how Jordan's doing as far as being the quarterback of the defense, he sort of played it off, and he said, "I'm not giving him any gold stars for that." So it's on one hand, that's just Jim's way. He's kind of a blustering guy, and he's not one that pats you on the back. He's more of the guy who's going to kick you on the butt. And he doesn't hand out compliments easily. But I'm starting to think they're not real comfortable with Jordan Hicks as a middle linebacker.
That's interesting, as he made a pretty big impression in a short amount of time last year before the injury. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com, is with us. You've got 5 guys listed as guys to keep an eye on tomorrow night. I think number 5 is interesting, Seumalo, because if you look at what's going on here with Lane Johnson, he could prove to be a prominent player all of a sudden if, in fact, they decide to go with Alan Barber playing right tackle. Seumalo would automatically be a guy that gets put under the microscope.
Yeah, he would. And they'd feel a lot more comfortable if he started progressing more rapidly. He had a big issue because he missed all of the off-season work and he was behind. Finally got to training camp, and he hasn't really caught up to this point. And sort of that battle they wanted to take place for the starting left guard spot has never materialized between him and Barber. But if Lane's not available, everything's on the table. And all of a sudden, you might see this team shuffling the deck. And that could mean Alan Barber moving to right tackle. As I mentioned yesterday, if Jason Peters is unable to play, it forces you to shuffle the deck. And Barber's certainly going to be either at left tackle or right tackle. And if you just want to get your best players on the field, well, then you have to start talking about Wisniewski. You have to start talking about Seumalo, and Matt Tobin and Dennis Kelly. So at that point, everything is wide open, and that's why this potential suspension of Lane Johnson is so important for this team, because that's one position that's a no-brainer that you're very, very strong at, and you didn't have to worry about. Yeah. And now all of a sudden, it's crisis mode.
Yeah, and, the last time Johnson got suspended, they knew, they had some knowledge of this in the offseason. I mean, he got nailed in April, right? So they could have gone forward with, hey, we're going to get a veteran swingman in here, someone that can play some tackle in the event, that he's going to miss 10 games. So this changes the dynamic of that a little bit.
Yeah, it does. And that's, by the way, that's another good point and a good indication that the Eagles certainly haven't known about this for a long time, because they would have had a better sort of emergency plan than the one currently in place. Although, the way we think about it, I know nobody in this town is all that thrilled with Dennis Kelly. He's not a sexy name, but they gave him an extension, and maybe this coaching staff thinks a little bit more of Dennis Kelly than the rest of us do.
John, another guy on your list, I wrote about Jalen Mills earlier this week, and a comment that Jim Schwartz said stood out to me when he says, it shows that we want to see him up against some of the different wide receivers as to why he was getting some time against the top receivers. And he said, you could read that into it. They like Mills, right? I mean, he's a guy they seem like they want to see him perform in practice, but he's a guy tomorrow night I would anticipate, and you have on number 4 on your list, as a guy that they want to see him when the lights go on.
Yeah, they do. And as we get deeper and deeper in August, and he keeps performing like he has, I mean, he has to start getting into the conversation for pushing, whether it's Nolan Carroll or Ron Brooks, because he's got a better skill set. He's better athletically. And we always talk about he's a 7th-round pick, but a lot of people had him rated as a 2nd or 3rd-round pick from a talent standpoint. He had some issues off the field at LSU. So he's not your typical 7th-rounder. Now, while I say that, though, if you look around the NFL, it's really, really difficult for cornerbacks to play at a high level in this league, even if they are second or third rounders. So it's not an easy thing to do, and it kind of speaks to the desperation I think the Eagles have at that position, because it's basically one guy with Otis McKelvin and then a bunch of other guys. And I think Jalen Mills has a chance to be at the top of that group.
All right, John. Another guy on that list that you have is Josh Huff. And I remember talking to you about a week ago, and you were saying they were, getting in the ball in the backfield, some ends around, some swing passes. He was a running back in college. They converted him to receiver. How has that materialized and evolved? And is he in danger, if he does not perform well in a game like tomorrow night?
I think he is in danger if he doesn't perform well throughout the preseason. But I'm more interested to see if the Eagles sort of unveil these packages, because every day during the install period it seems to be a different play, whether it's a jet sweep, an end around, as you mentioned, a quick hitch, a bubble screen, a smoke screen. Every day it's something else to try to get the ball to Josh Huff, running routes out of the backfield so he can get away from press coverage. They understand he's not a good receiver, and he still can't get off press coverage. He still doesn't catch the ball consistently. He still doesn't run good routes. All that said, with the football in his hands, he's the best player on this team outside of Darren Sproles. And that's not a good thing to say, but you need somebody with some explosiveness, and the Eagles are trying desperately in practice to get the ball to Josh Huff.
We know Carson Wentz, you have him on the list at number 2, is going to play a majority of the second half, and things got a little interesting in regards to Wentz in terms of if Lane Johnson's not there, if he ever got thrust into action, he could become one of those guys that gets a little gun shy. But tomorrow night, we'll get our first shot at him, and how he plays is really, I guess, will be the first indication of where this team could be a couple years down the road. I mean, people are going to want to see this guy perform, whether or not he has anything to do with this season or not. That's just the nature of fans and the NFL.
Yeah, it is, and obviously he's the face of the franchise, as I said, and it's very rare that a third-string quarterback is the face of the franchise, but that's the reality for the Philadelphia Eagles. And, it's going to be difficult to put up big numbers simply because he's going to be playing with second-string and third-string guys. Generally, when you get down that far in the roster, the defenses usually have an advantage. So I'm more concerned about watching for his mechanics, because that's the one thing that Doug has been harping on throughout training camp. If the footwork is not there from day to day, and they're preaching that to him every single day, you have to be consistent every single time. And that's why you've heard reports about fluttering balls at times and the ball dying in the air at times. That's because the footwork is bad and the mechanics are bad at times. So he's got to clean that up, and it starts on Thursday night. We'll see how he's been progressing.
Your number one guy on the list is Lane Johnson, and we'll see how the Eagles end up handling him. John McMullen, 97.3 ESPN.com. I do want to get your take on a funny story. I don't know if it's a funny story, but an interesting story you wrote about at the website concerning Dion Long. Did the Eagles or anybody have any idea in the way that they were able to acquire him?
Well, I'm sure they did, but it wasn't made aware publicly. Nobody knew about it until Hard Knocks debuted on HBO, and it was on the show, and that Jeff Fisher cut him because he broke a team rule, and he basically brought a woman back to his room at UC Irvine, and that's a no-no, and he cut him for it. And that's the reason he was available. And then Jordan Matthews gets hurt here, so you need an extra body at wide receiver, and the Eagles pick him up. So it's just one of those stories. I mean, he's not going to make the football team, and they did need an extra body. But it's interesting because he became an NFL star in one night
because
of that program. And I got a kick out of it from Jeff Fisher's perspective, though. He called it 7 and 9 expletive of what Liam and Jeff Fisher's been going 7 and 9 long before Dion Long came in his life.
Yeah. We're not going to be 7 and 9 or 8 and 8 or 9 and 7. I'm sick of this, And he kind of got a little fiery at the end there, and I guess maybe that was a little indication of people questioning him. He's like, I know what I'm doing, you guys need to listen to me because I know what I'm doing. But he's been questioned. Like, what'd you think of the way it was portrayed on? Now the Foles thing's interesting because it made it seem like, hey Nick, how was your summer? Oh, that's nice. We're going to go ahead and cut you. I mean, did Foles anticipate that coming? Because there's some thought that he asked for his release, and was that Fisher just saying, hey, we're going to grant your release? Was that dramatic for television? I thought that was a little odd, the way that was set up.
Yeah, I think that was a little WWE scripted for the cameras.
Right.
Because Nick was lobbying for his release for a very long time for obvious reasons. Jared Goff there is obviously the future, and Jeff Fisher made it clear that Case Keenum was going to be ahead of Nick, so he wanted to get out of there, and understandably so. And by the way, the Rams also wanted to move him, but they wanted to trade him and possibly get whatever, conditional 7th-round pick, at least something, and they weren't able to do it. So, yeah, I think that was a little played up for the cameras.
Well, if Nick Foles was actually on the other end of that call, he's a pretty stand-up guy to put himself in that situation. Sure, you want to cut me? Yeah, we can set this up.
Well, there's nothing you can do. You see every year on Hard Knocks about guys getting the call and to come to the coach's office and get cut. I mean, you have to be a professional in that type of environment because, remember, you're trying to hook on with somebody else. And the last thing you want to do as a player getting released or cut is explode on the coach or the general manager, because obviously that's going to get around to other football teams, and they're not going to want to bring you in. So you almost have to be professional. And nine times out of 10, guys are very, very professional.
I think Dion Long was almost stunned. I don't know that I was waiting for him to flip the desk over or something, and he was so stunned he just got up and walked out like, really, that just happened. I just got caught for having a little play time in my dorm room. Okay, see you later. And the Eagles picked it up.
Hey, Jeff Fisher, from his standpoint, even though I'm not a big fan as a head coach, sometimes when you're dealing with very, very young people, and you get frustrated. You lay down the law and say, hey, there's no visitors, be on time. That's your 2 rules. And the guy says, I had a visitor, but I'm not breaking curfew. I was going to send her out before curfew. And it's like, what part don't you understand? So I kind of understand the frustration from Jeff Fisher's
right. It was like he couldn't believe that this guy broke the one rule of like, dude, I literally just told you, no women, and seriously. And I thought the guy was going to be like, all right, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to run? Am I going to be fined? He's like, so I'm going to go ahead and cut you. And it was like, whoa, all right, man, kudos to you. Yeah, I gave Fisher some credit.
Well, I wrote on today's pigskin.com talking about something else, but realized it's different. If that would have been Jared Goff, it would have never seen the light of day. So there is a sliding scale of justice in the NFL,
no doubt.
Although, and there always has and there always will be. But Dion's on the back end of the roster, and if you do something like that, you're going to get cut.
We'll preview tomorrow night's game, some other things John's looking for in tomorrow's segment. John McMullen every day with the Eagles Report, 405, 97.3 ESPN. And, of course, all throughout the football season as we are getting the countdown starting tomorrow night. Eagles-Bucks right here on 97.3. Thank you, John. Take care, pal.
Hey, thanks,